Good evening, everybody. My name is Tim Sika, and I am here this evening on behalf of the San Francisco Film Critics Circle, sffcc.org, for more information. The movie that you just watched, Beautiful Boy, is based on the memoirs Tweak, Growing Up on Methamphetamines by Nick Sheff, who was played by Timothy Chalamet in the movie that you just watched, and Beautiful Boy, A Father's Journey Through His Son's Addiction by David Sheff, who will be joining us in just a minute here to talk about the film. But I wanted to give you a little bit of background on David before we get him up here. He's an American author of the New York Times best-selling books Clean, Overcoming Addiction and Ending America's Greatest Tragedy, and the memoir, as I said, Beautiful Boy, A Father's Journey Through His Son's Addiction. In 2009, David was included in Time Magazine's Time 100, the world's most influential people, and Beautiful Boy was named the best nonfiction book of the year by Entertainment Weekly. It also won a slew of other literary prizes. And as a journalist, David ranks way up there, having written for the New York Times, Rolling Stone, Playboy, Wired, Fortune, and National Public Radio's All Things Considered. His interview subjects have included John Lennon, Frank Zappa, Steve Jobs, Al Weiwei, Jack Nicholson, Carl Sagan, Barney Frank, among others. And in addition to Beautiful Boy, David wrote the books Game Over, China Dawn, and All We Are Saying, the last major interview with John Lennon and Yoko Ono. And one last thing here, too. Beautiful Boy was based on David's article, My Addicted Son, that first appeared in the New York Times Magazine and that won an award for outstanding contribution to advancing the understanding of addictions from the American Psychological Association. So please, if you would, give it up with all you got and extend a warm San Francisco welcome to David Sheff. Get my notes here. Can you talk about the process of what was essentially the handing over of your work to another artist to interpret? I know I've struggled with mine too. Wait. There you go.
Well, thank you, Tim, and thanks for being here and thanks for staying. Well, you know, I had not ever intended to write about this, what had happened to our family. It was really a matter of surviving all those years. And one of the ways as a writer that I survived is to just get through nights that I couldn't sleep by sitting and writing and trying to make sense of what we were going through. And it was sort of almost like an exorcism just to try to deal with what we were going through. But then one of the things that happened over the course of this experience was that whereas if somebody else was dealing in their family with somebody who became ill with almost any other disease you can name, it's hard, it's obviously tragic, it's obviously really, really horrible, but there's a big difference because with addiction, often people who have experienced it know that there's another part of it, which is about the stigma around addiction, about the way people are judged and the shame.
Right.
And because of that, I felt that when finally Nick was doing better and he was sober for about a year and a half, that because of that, it was time to talk about it. I kept it secret for a long time because of that same fear of being judged. You know, what would people think of me? I must be a terrible father if my son became a drug addict. So I wrote about it after talking to Nick and his mom and my wife and everyone to make sure everybody felt okay about it. And the article first came out, as you mentioned, then it became the book Beautiful Boy, and the reaction is what really was astounding to me. It was that I learned that we were not alone, that we were one of countless families who were experiencing the same thing, and also felt that shame and also were hiding it, and finally were the main thing I think people saw when they read our story was that they weren't alone. And then, just to answer your question, when people approached us to make this movie, we were really scared, really reluctant. It was terrifying in a way to give our life stories over to someone else.
Which you knew they were going to change, right, for their own purposes,
and
right.
It's Hollywood, and we just didn't know. And but it felt that movies just have a reach that no book has, and the idea of reaching more people made it worth taking that risk.
Well, I think too, and this is probably obvious, but the whatever they quote unquote do to the book, I mean, it's the movie, and the book always remains the book. And I've found that that one always helped the other, despite whatever whatever issues people may have about the final result of the movie. At least, can I ask? Speaking of the movie, can I ask you? Since we're here and I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you what your honest response was the first time you saw the movie.
I was devastated, and I was devastated. I tried to come in thinking, I wrote my book, and this is the movie made by Felix van Groningen, the director, and it's someone else's story.
You were devastated. How? Like,
I saw, it's one thing I wrote about it. Nick wrote about his experience. We talked about it a lot. I mean, he and I, we spent so much time talking about it that I kind of knew all the story, but it was different seeing it. That's what was devastating. It was real in a different way. It brought it all back. It brought all the anguish back. It brought all the fear, the trepidation, the uncertainty about whether I was going to see him again when he would disappear. But also watching the scenes of him, the drug use scenes were just devastating. Watching the scene, just watching, one of the things I think was sort of amazing about the movie, but also it was one of the hardest things to watch, was that many people have this idea of what a drug addict looks like, and there's this idea that they're out there and they're selfish and they don't care about us and they're out there having fun and all they do is want to get high. Mm-hmm. But that's not the way it is. I mean, I know that nobody wants to be addicted, and it's all about pain. And you see that, I think, in Timothée Chalamet's face in every part of that movie. So that was really hard to remember how much suffering my son had, how much he'd gone through for those 10 years.
You were saying earlier that there was actually a kind of like a physical resemblance with Timothy and your son at one point.
Yeah, it
was. All this?
It's uncanny. I mean, if you see Nick as a teenager, Timothy, he's got a similar look, but it's more than that. It's more just the way he moves and the way that he, just the energy that he has. It was very eerie. And when the two of them are together, it's almost like they've known each other their whole lives. There's just this crazy kinds of conversation and this excitement, and they both are excited about the same things, about the same movies, the same books. The way that has impacted my life is that suddenly on Twitter, I got all of a sudden 1,000 or so new followers, and they're all named things like, Timothée Chalamet's hair, and Timothée Chalamet 5632, and one of them, Timothée Chalamet's eyebrows. Really.
Well, you said something that I was amused about. You said when Nick and Timothy were they were going from, I think, one premiere to another one, and they were in a private plane. That's a funny story. Could you relate that where Nick said, "I'm on a private plane"?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that happened that's really strange is Hollywood is a different world, and the idea of us. I mean, it was so surreal to see the movie for another reason. I mean, the main thing was that it was just hard to watch, but also to have actors who, well, in the case of Steve Carell, of course, someone I've watched for years and years and years, up there with the same name and doing some of the same things and kind of having, going through a lot of the same crises that I went through was, very surreal, very strange. And then, I mean, it was actually very cool when I met him. He said, the first time he said that the reason he wanted to do this, he said, he did not have experiences with drugs. He never used drugs like I had. But he said that when he read the script and when he read the book, it just touched him to his, pierced his heart, because he said, I'm a dad. Yeah. And I understand what that's like.
He's got teenagers, doesn't he?
And he's got young teenagers, and he said, this idea about wanting to protect our children, but also understanding that ultimately we can't, is devastating for a parent. Anyway, so and then Timothy, when they cast Timothy, it was sort of a testament to the director, I think, because now everybody knows that he's this amazing actor. But when he was cast in this movie, nobody had seen Call Me by Your Name had not been released yet. The director saw, I think, a couple hundred actors and tapes and all this stuff, and decided that this kid was a genius. And of course, since then, he's become, one of the hottest young stars, maybe the hottest. And Nick, I mean, if you can judge by fans, when we were together in a few cities in Toronto and in
I saw
London
the Mill
and
Valley photos. It was like, it reminded me of the Beatles.
yeah, the doors open for his car. He jumps out. He's always wearing like the coolest weird clothes, and there's just girls are lined up screaming. It's like the Beatles. It's something, and people, and he's a mesmerizing actor. I mean, I think he's a genius, so it's deserved. But anyway, to answer your story,
Nick found himself on a plane with
yeah, so I'm sorry. So
Yeah.
the point there is that one of the cool things about the fact that Timothy is who he is, and that this movie is coming out now, it's coming out at a time when, we all know, and many of us have lived the fact that we are now in a crisis where,
Yep.
the overdose is now killing more people in this country under 50 than anything else, and 200 people are dying every single day. And it's hard to talk to young people about drugs. I mean, when we know that the messages that we were given, or at least I was given when I was a kid, didn't work. Don't do drugs, just say no. But the idea that this young person is bringing people to see a movie that has, from what I've heard, inspired a lot of conversation is sort of extraordinary. And anyway, because of this whole thing, to get to the answer to your question, Amazon wanted to bring the movie out to start conversations in communities. So they have Nick with Timothy going around the country to some smallish towns and some big cities as well, talking to kids. And Nick tonight, it was the first day tonight, and they had to go to 2 different cities in one day and go to 2 different events. And he called me up and he said, I'm on a private jet with Timothy Chalamet, and we're flying between Dallas and Austin. So that's another bizarre piece of this, I guess.
What was it? To what extent did you interface with the director, with Steve Carell, who played you? I mean, what were those conversations like? I mean, did you get to talk at all to the screenwriter, or I know it was co-written, right, by the director and I don't know the name of the other
Luke Davis.
Luke Davis, yeah,
the guy who
right.
did Lion.
Did they? I mean, were you in on any of those creative sessions or any of that kind of stuff, or?
Well, the thing that I guess
have any
made
kind of
us feel
approval, I
okay.
guess?
We didn't have approval at all.
Yeah,
In fact, we
no.
didn't want it. We just wanted to step back and say, you guys are filmmakers the director, when we saw his films, he's Belgian and he's never directed a movie in English, but we watched all of his movies with subtitles, of course, and they're amazing. I mean, he's an amazing director.
Yeah, you said he's like Spielberg over in.
Well, when in Belgium, he's Spielberg or George Lucas or
that
something.
recognizable, yeah.
But his movies are very beautiful, and they're the ones that he made in Belgium are all very different, but they all have at their heart the story of a family and the struggles of family. And he's really young, so the idea that he can create these sort of an amazing world, and he's an amazing storyteller. But anyway, from him and some of the other people involved in making a movie, we got a commitment from the very beginning. The one thing that we really cared about was that they said that they did not want to do another stereotypic, cliched view of what a drug addict looks like and what drug addiction is.
Yeah.
And so they were really committed in that way. And I think as part of that, they wanted to understand our story as much as they could. And so the director and the writer, we spent so much time with them. They asked a million questions. They went through our photographs and created some of the things in the movie are kind of scarily real. Some of it, of course, is invented. But they wanted so much, mostly of all, to get the emotions right, and I think they pulled that off.
Yeah, yeah. Questions? We can talk here all night, but I would like to get your feedback. Would you like to ask David anything? If you could raise your hand, and I will come into the audience and give you the mic, so we don't have to repeat the question. Okay? Yeah, of course, I'll way up there. Well, while I go up there, how's Nick doing today? How's he doing now?
Well, we're lucky. I mean, as I talked about a second ago, the idea that this is so many people right now are in crisis, and so many families are in crisis, and so many kids are, not just kids, but so many people are overdosing. And the fact that I can say that now Nick's been clean for 8 years, and he's doing wonderfully. I mean, he's has a life that he always aspired to, but it makes me feel, of course, incredibly lucky, and even a little bit, I think, of something like survivor's guilt with this idea that so many people aren't making it, and there's no reason why Nick survived except for the fact that we're lucky, and we really are, because I hear every day from parents who tell me that that their story is just like ours, except their child didn't make it.
What has been the impact on your other two children?
Well, Daisy and Jasper, who here are these little, blonde kids, are not blonde, and they are also not little anymore. Daisy's 22 and Jasper's 24. And they say, and I think we lived the experience, that siblings often in a family where someone becomes addicted are the collateral damage. They were traumatized, and they were traumatized on two levels, on many levels, but on one level because they worshiped Nick. They adored him. He was their beloved big brother who, just like in the movie, playing in some of those joyful moments are very much reflective of how it was when Nick was with Daisy and Jasper. They just had fun. And so the idea that their brother had disappeared, or when he would show up, was somebody different. I mean, the scene when Nick took, Jasper's money. It happened, and it's just bafflement. It's like, what is going on? And they were so scared, and they were so worried. But the other thing that affected them was the fact that their mom and dad, Karen and I, were out of our minds, worried and doing things that were insane. Like when I came to the hate, looking for Nick, in the middle of the night, and Karen and I weren't sleeping, and Daisy and Jasper would wake up, and they'd come into the kitchen, and they'd realize that we didn't sleep all night, and they'd say, well, where's Nick? And the answer was that we didn't know. And so there was, sometimes we would think and hope that they were so little that they didn't know what was going on, but it's the opposite. They just absorbed everything. And I think if it was not for the fact that we did recognize the fact that they needed help, and we all needed help as a family, and we went into family therapy. We had counseling, and a big effort was made, actually, that was really impressive to me by Nick himself when he finally was clean, that he felt so bad, most of all, more than anything else. He felt bad about what, again, not intentionally, he was ill, but what that experience did to Daisy and Jasper, that he worked and worked and worked over years to repair their relationship. And sometimes people write to me and ask me at events, they tell me their stories about their families, and they said they cannot ever imagine talking to their parents again, or to a brother or sister, or they're heartbroken because their child won't speak to them anymore. And I guess one thing that I can say, and I know this from our own experience, is that families do heal, but it takes time, and it takes hard work.
You alluded to this earlier, David, but what do you think the movie got the most right about your book?
Well, I guess the main thing is the emotion that you see in that family, the stress, the constant stress, the way that the cycle in addiction is. It's not always like we lived it, where sometimes people get sober once and they stay sober, but I haven't seen that a lot. Oftentimes it's the way we experienced it, which was that there was so much hope when Nick would get clean, and he would go into treatment, and he would leave treatment, and he was committed to staying sober, but then he would relapse. And so it would be this devastation followed by hope, followed by devastation. And the devastation was terror. And as much as I think is shown in the movie, it was worse in real life. I have to say, and it went on for 10 years.
Wow. I liked, one of the things I liked in the film too, and I don't know if you intended this in your book, but there was this on-the-nose kind of critique, at least that was my takeaway, of institutionalized drug rehab organizations who to me have always seemed at times to be more interested in, self-perpetuating themselves than helping to eradicate the cause of an individual's addiction. I don't know if that's possible, but I remember when I saw the scene where the dad is talking with one of the counselors, and she says, "Well, relapse is like part of the process." My eyeballs rolled because I just thought, "What? I don't know.
Well, the first part of what you were saying is true, and I think anybody who's who's fallen into the rehab world knows that it's a catastrophe. It's so hard to get good help. People promised me that give us. There was an ad that I saw when I was looking for places that said, give us your child and $10,000, and 7 days later we'll return them drug free. There were places that gave. In retrospect, I know that Nick didn't get treatment at most of the programs that he went to. It was useful that he was off the streets, but they would punish kids for being ill. It made no sense, and it did not help. When twice in the movie, I can't remember if it was a doctor each time or one time, Steve Carell, the dad says it, but the line, relapse is part of recovery. And I wish that, if I had been in there with a pen, I would have maybe added a word in there, which I would say relapse can be or is often part of recovery.
Right.
And the reason that that's important, first of all, everyone doesn't relapse. But the reason that it's important to acknowledge that is that people feel that, addiction is a chronic disease. You can't take a pill or get surgery and it's over. And so people do often relapse. And the reason it's important to know that that can be part of recovery is so people don't get discouraged and to realize that it's part of the deal. Sometimes it can happen. It's good for families to know. When Nick would relapse at first, I would be mad at him. I would think that it was a failure, that he wasn't trying hard enough, that he was weak, whatever.
Yeah.
But I learned that that's part of what this disease is all about.
Yeah.
And so then I could look at him instead of with judgment, with compassion.
We're being given the hook, actually, because they have to do something else in the theater. So just in summation here, beautiful boy, if you like the movie, please tell people about it and tell them to come out and see it. And the book, of course, is amazing. It's a must-read. David's book that the movie's based on. I don't know if are we going to be maybe out in the lobby a little bit, so a couple of people still have some questions maybe before we leave. You can talk to David. I know some of you don't like to get on the mic, and I get that. But anyway, please thank David Sheff for coming out here tonight.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you all for staying, really.